So it's all about creating an environment that allows you to get your mind ready to race, to run hard, and to hopefully be in the best possible space, not only physically but mentally on race day. So good morning, welcome back to the channel. I hope your training is going well. In today's video, I'm going to be talking all things tapering, and I've got 6 tips that you can hopefully apply to your training in the preparation to a race to be in the best shape possible. In today's video, I'm going to be talking all things tapering, what is tapering and why it's important for us as runners to get it right, to be in the best shape possible when it comes to our key races. So let's jump straight into it. What is tapering? Tapering is basically reducing the overall volume, intensity or frequency of our running in preparation for a race. It allows us to sort of freshen up, have nice fresh legs on race day, and hopefully mentally and physically be in tip-top shape to perform at our best, to run PBs and to hit those goal race times that we all aspire to do throughout our training periods. Now it's important to note that with tapering, all individuals are going to be completely different. So for example, the methods that I use to taper won't necessarily be something that can be directly applied to your training, and vice versa. Tapering methods that you use won't necessarily work for me. I have built up over the last couple of years an understanding of how my body reacts to certain things, certain ways to taper. For example, I've learned that if I reduce my weekly volume and frequency of my runs too much, I can end up feeling a bit flat on race day. So I tend to keep my volume fairly high in comparison to other runners and just drop down that intensity. But we're going to be talking all things tapering in today's video and hopefully get you physically and mentally prepared for your important races that you have coming up. So let's jump in to 6 tips for tapering. The first is to note that there are 3 ways in which you can taper. So the first is to reduce your overall training volume. So for example, if you currently run 4 hours a week, 2 weeks before a race you might want to reduce that to 3 hours. The week before a race you might want to reduce that to 2 hours. So you gradually decrease the overall volume of your training so that when it comes to race day you're nice and fresh. The second way you can taper is to reduce the intensity. Now this is something I really like to do in my taper, is basically do the same sessions that you usually would week in, week out, but just reduce that intensity a little bit. So for example, if you usually go out and run 4-minute kilometers for your tempo, maybe go out and do, I don't know, 4-minute 20 per kilometer. You're still gonna get that training stimulus, but hopefully your legs won't be as fatigued afterwards. So when it comes to race day, again, you can be nice and fresh. And the third way to taper is the frequency of your run. So if you currently run 6 times a week, in the lead up to a race, you might want to reduce that to 5, 4, 3, for example. Now with these 3 ways to taper, some coaches suggest that you should only focus on one of these categories. So for example, you keep the volume the same, you reduce the intensity, and you keep the number of runs you do per week the same. Whereas other people suggest you should reduce all of them. The key thing to note here is basically that everyone adapts differently to different training stimulus. The same goes with a taper, so it's something you're gonna have to do a little bit of trial and error, which again, I'll talk about in later stage of this video. So my second tip for tapering is to look back at previous races that went really well and see what you did in the build up. So for me, I would say I have one really good race, maybe every 6 races I do. So in the preparation for a really big key race, I look back at when a race went really well and look at the week leading up to the race. What did I do? What was my training look like? And even go back as far as sort of 3 or 4 weeks and think, right, I did my last long run 3 weeks before the big race, and that left me feeling really good. And I also look back at races where it didn't go so well and think maybe, oh, I maybe got the taper a little bit wrong. So that would be my second tip, is to have a look back at races that went well and try and apply what you did then to your next taper into your next key race. So on to my third tip, and that is to write yourself a taper contract. Now I've completely stolen this from Stephen Scullion podcast. This is the second time Stephen has got a shout out on this YouTube channel in the last few weeks. He's an Irish marathon runner, 209. He has a podcast, called Journey to the Olympics, where he documents all his training. And one of the things he was saying he does in preparation for a race is to write himself a taper contract. Now, taking it easy in the weeks leading up to a race can be really difficult for some runners. And if you're like me, you find yourself getting a bit sort of agitated, you're not running as much, you've got more free time, and mentally it can be quite difficult. You can end up feeling a little bit flat. So my advice would be to write yourself a contract of things you're going to do in the week before a race or the weeks leading up to a race, that then you can hold yourself accountable. If you don't have this sort of taper contract, some days you might wake up and think, oh, I know I'm only meant to run 10 kilometers today, but I'm feeling really good, so I went out and run 15. Now those things can be really sort of detrimental to your race and to your taper. But if you write a contract of all the things you're going to do in the lead up, so for example, it could be day by day. For example, on Monday I'm going to do 30 minutes easy, and then a stretching session. On Tuesday I'm going to do a light tempo at 4:20 per kilometre. Or it might be things like make sure I'm in bed at 10 o'clock to maximise my sleep, or make sure I'm eating healthy, cut out chocolate and beer in the week or the weeks leading up to a race. Basically, a contract will hold you accountable. Sign it, put it on the fridge. You can then go back and look at it and think, right, I'm not going to do any of these things to sort of hamper my race and give myself the best opportunity to race well on race day. Tip number 4 is to prime the legs in preparation for a race. Now, to do this, you can do strides. If you're not familiar with strides, they're basically short sort of bursts of pace at up to about 80% over about 20-30 seconds. You don't want to go any further than that, because then you start sort of fatiguing, and you don't want to build up any fatigue, especially in race week. And yeah, strides are really good at getting the body used to moving fast, getting the leg turnover up, improving efficiency, all these sort of things that really can help when it comes to race day, but hopefully keep you nice and fresh as well. Tip number 5 is a simple one. It's trial and error. Basically work out what works for you. In the sort of build up to my key races, I have sort of B races. So my key race would be an A goal race, and then I have a couple of races leading up, which are my sort of B, my practice races, to get everything ready to practice things like the taper. So for example, in the build up to a marathon, I'll do a half marathon as a practice my taper, see how I feel on that race day for the half marathon. If I feel great, excellent, I can do exactly that when it comes to the A goal race, the marathon. If things don't feel so great in that half marathon, that B race, then I can adjust things ready for the big race. So I personally have learnt that an aggressive taper for me doesn't really work. So for example, if I cut the running I do in the weeks leading up to a race too much, I can end up feeling really flat. So I tend to keep my sort of weekly volume fairly high in comparison to other runners. I just like to drop my intensity quite a lot, so I don't build up any of that fatigue in the legs. Some people like to keep the intensity fairly high and just reduce the number of runs they're doing. Everybody's different. It's all about trial and error. Work out what works for you, and hopefully you can apply that to your next race. And my 6th and final piece of advice in today's video is to mentally prepare for the race itself. Now, I think this is one of sort of the most untalked about things when it comes to racing, is how much it can be a mental sort of breakthrough on race day that leads to a really good result. Not necessarily the weeks and months of training that you do to build the physical side. Obviously the physical really helps when it comes to pushing the body to an absolute limit, but mentally you need to be in the best sort of headspace before a race to push yourself to your physical capabilities, basically. So before a race, to sort of mentally prepare, I like to turn my phone off, get away from those distractions of social media, just be with myself in my thoughts. I'll visualize the race. So for example, this weekend I've got a 5,000 meter race, so I'll visualize things like the start, where I want to be when the gun goes off, where I want to be in the pack sort of at the halfway point, and how I want to come across the finish, feeling strong, sort of overtaking people in that home straight. These are all the sort of things I visualize before a race. So it's all about creating an environment that allows you to get your mind ready to race, to run hard, and to hopefully be in the best possible space, not only physically but mentally on race day. So there we go, 6 tips today to help you get ready for your next race If you're watching this the night before a race, then I wish you all the best. But until next time, aspire to run, run to inspire, and we'll see you again soon.